So today we're going to talk, if there's anybody who's advanced on the extra credit or would like to talk about it, we can do that. Otherwise, today we're looking at Chapter 3, and we're introducing the assignment that is due next week. When is it actually due? It is due on September 12th. Yeah, the reader wrap scripts. So we'll talk about those. And anybody, Corey, I know you were working on the fact checking. How is it going?
It went okay. I mean, it was one of those things. I just went through, but some stuff was kind of hard to find, like phone numbers, and when I was thinking about like mine was on just like the heat wave. They did a report on the heat wave, and people were hospitalized. And now I'm like, okay, which hospital, which phone number should I put down? And so I ended up putting like a whole bunch of phone numbers.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it's like I kind of have to simplify how I do that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you were going an extra step. I think it asked you like, you know, where would you find that information?
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, offering it is just as good as finding it. Yeah. Okay. And it was from what source?
It was the Examiner.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Good. Anybody else working? Hey, Brian. We're talking about the fact-checking assignment. Anybody? Okay, so that was extra credit. All right. So from here on in, stuff is for credit. So the one that we're talking about today, which is due next week, is a for credit assignment. So it's due next Tuesday. And yeah, we got that going. Let's take a look at PowerPoints here for this chapter. Yes. So in this chapter, we talk a little bit about grammar, style, language basics, which would cover writing on any of the platforms that we're working on. So broadcast writing or web writing. It's all pretty useful. I don't want to get into all our learning objectives, but there they are. So getting back to the idea that what we're doing in everything we do is cultivating the trust and credibility with our audience. It's important that we try to write well in order to get that to happen. If we're making too many grammatical errors, our stuff is hard to follow and it's unclear. And also we start to appear, you know, like not a very credible news source. So a couple of good reasons why we should watch our grammar. It's not my favorite topic, and I don't hold myself out as an authority about it, so that's important. However, it's part of communicating clearly. So we want people to be able to understand what we're doing, and also to be able to cut stuff down, to cut out extras where we run too long in our writing or where we're unclear. So we'll get more into the editing part next class, but in this class, talking about a couple of basics to keep your eye on, and then we're going to spend a lot of time just talking about our assignment and putting some of these ideas to use in that assignment.
Yeah, being well-spoken is pretty useful.
It helps. But if you're not particularly well-spoken or you don't write particularly well, you can still make that extra effort and get there. You know, that I think is because we have a lot of folks who's, for instance, their first language isn't English, and that's an issue. They have to work extra hard in order to write English well, and I appreciate that extra work for sure. So more tools in the toolbox. Yeah, we'll spend a certain amount of time looking at sentences. Again, I find that front-loading a lot of discussion about grammar is, it just puts everybody into a trance. And I think when I fall back on the things that we're going to talk about today, it's because I've written something, I've written a draft, and I recognize within it, it needs improvement, it needs clarification. So typically I use this stuff not the first time I write something, but rather when I go back and try to fix stuff up and unravel these incredibly complicated sentences that I've written. That's when I try to, schematically outline a sentence or something like that. What's the structure here so I can get back to what I'm trying to do. One nice thing about broadcast writing is it's very conversational. You're setting out to try to talk to people the way that they're used to being talked to, with a little bit of an upgrade because you're trying to avoid factual errors. You're trying to use language precisely, but you're also trying to avoid the kinds of complex sentences that you might often write in a term paper that probably don't have their place in an oral form of communication like television or radio. So we're shooting for simple conversational writing, which nonetheless is interesting to read and to listen to. And we're trying to stay factually accurate while we do it. And often we're working with facts that we may have to simplify or contextualize for people. So there's plenty of challenge in writing simply for broadcasting. So thoughts about sentence structure here. And as I said, I would typically come back to this when I've written a sentence that turns out to be perhaps too complex. And so, the diagram that's put up here is sort of subject, verb, object. So it's like who does what to whom or to what, So he kicked the ball, John kicked the ball, John wrote an essay. It really is, the most simple construction. So when I get into a compound sentence, which is maybe two of these coupled together, maybe turned around backwards, that's where I sometimes just settle down and go, okay, that sentence is too long, that sentence is maybe needs some unraveling. And so I'll break it down, basically try to come back to this and then build it back up with, more clarity about, who actually is the subject and, making sure that the subject conforms to the verb, for instance. There are some pretty typical problems that can arise from that we should probably get into next class when we talk about editing. But in broadcasting, advice here is pick concrete nouns and vigorous verbs. So the noun, of course, would be the subject, a proper noun, who, or object. The verb, the word that's doing stuff. I know this all seems real basic when you're doing this. However, we have a couple of little handouts here.
Can you repeat
that? Which are useful.
Concrete nouns and
vigorous verbs. A little alliteration there. Let's take a look at, where are we here? At some things that I thought I'd put up here, which I'm not seeing. Why is that? Where did they go? Let's see here.
down the memory hole.
Oh, it's down the midnight hole, I think there. Yeah.
What are we looking for?
Oh, I know what we're looking for. One sec here. Multimedia, anything on the web here. There's something here about the concrete noun. What is the concrete noun? Recognize the concrete noun. So nouns can be split into those that are abstract, those that are concrete. Concrete, think about things that you can directly experience, touch, taste, act upon physically. So when people read these, it makes the writing more vivid. It makes their experience better. It's, here's reliable. Diane's beagle licked strawberry ice cream off her chin. So in that example, for instance, referring to something concrete like the ice cream so, brings more of your experience to bear than referring to something rather more abstract. So when possible, try to pick a concrete noun to use. So here, disapproval would be an abstract noun, which tends in writing to kind of lead you off into a more kind of intellectual area. So advice is keep it concrete if you can. Verbs, in terms of verbs, if you can arrange your sentences. Where am I after here? I'm after other resources that are back out here. Arrange your sentences in active voice is another useful thing to do. So let's just open that up. Let me get that there. There we go. And this is something we can work with a little bit together. So in the active voice, the subject does the action. So in this little diagram here of subject, verb, and object, this is a typical active structure. Liz played the piano. So subject, Liz played something, the piano, right? The passive voice turns things around, and you'll often use the passive voice in essays. And it has its place even in news writing for broadcast, for sure. When you don't have a definite notion of the subject, you can use the passive voice in order to avoid the subject. For instance, if you were writing a story, stick with the same example, it'd be kind of silly, but let's say you don't know exactly who played the piano. Was it a child? So you could go to passive voice and say, well, the piano was played, and then the earthquake happened, or something like that, which you could use the passive voice if you don't know that it's Liz or you don't know it's a child, so you can avoid stating something that you don't know for sure. But typically, having the facts at your fingertips, go with the active voice. So Liz played the piano is preferable, especially in radio or television, which is an oral medium. It's easier for people to process somebody's doing something, what are they doing, and to what. That's easier to process, at least as your most basic construction. And typically, you can get away with using less words in the active voice as well. So let's take a look, if we can, at a couple of these and just call them out. Number one, is that active or passive? Thomas feeds his dog. That's active, right? We got Thomas feeds the dog. The dog is fed by Thomas. Passive, right? The family went to the beach. Active. Okay, let's make that passive. How can we make that passive?
The beach is where the family went.
Something like that, because we can't just turn it around easily, right? The beach went to
It's happening in Florida.
the beach went to the family. Not really. Nick, you got to.
Family has gone to the beach.
Okay, gotcha. Oh no, that's just turning that into.
That's past
That's
participle.
yeah. So we still are putting, what we're observing is the subject before the verb. So it would be more like
Visited by the family.
the beach was visited by the family. That was good. Who said that one? All right, nice. The letter was written by Marshall.
Passive.
Marshall wrote the letter would be active. The letter written by Marshall.
Also, if
Awesome.
the subject is before the person, it's passive.
The subject has to come before the verb. So the person doing the thing has to come before the verb. So in this case, it's Marshall who was doing the writing. So Marshall would have to come before the verb, right? So
Wrote the letter.
Marshall wrote the letter would be the active form of that. So for is passive, and Marshall wrote the letter. The game had been won by the blue team.
Passive.
Passive, yes, the blue team won the game. The problem was solved. Passive, okay, but in that case, we don't know who solved the problem. So there may be a good reason for using the passive tense there. The problem was solved. They moved on because we don't know who actually solved the problem. So we could use it that way. The stuntman risked his life. Active, right? It's, yeah. The fire was extinguished. Passive, and again, we don't know the subject. Who extinguished the fire? It could be the fireman, it could be George. We don't know, so we're using the passive there with justification. The car was being cleaned by its owner.
Passive.
Passive, right? Active would be the owner cleaned the car. Yeah. It gets cold here during the winter.
Active.
Let's see here. Do we have a subject? It gets cold here during the winter.
Yeah, that's
Gets cold. Get cold. Gets cold is definitely the verb, right? During the winter.
It
So
gets cold.
it gets cold. I don't know. Anyone got some answers on that?
I think
don't
it's
have that.
passive because it has it.
It gets cold.
But it is the subject.
So it could be the subject.
Here
and
is the subject. It gets cold here.
Here would be the location.
The sentence sucks.
Well, it's something that you would say. We should be able to figure it out. Let's see here. What's doing? It's the weather. The weather is getting cold.
Whether
What's it doing?
Represented
It's
by
getting.
it is the subject. Get is the verb.
Get is a verb for sure. We're all in agreement on that. It gets cold here.
Let's just move on.
I guess
Brain,
it does work.
brain teaser.
It's
Gets
active.
gets cold here.
Let's.
But during the winter is unnecessary. If you cut off those words, it does fit
Cold here.
subject, verb, object.
It gets cold here. So we're calling it active, I think, with some reason. During the winter, doesn't add. You're right. I say active, but we'll look it up. I don't have the answers here.
The way it is, you could put it in any direction and it still just like is the same thing.
Yes.
It's weird. All right.
Well, it gets cold here during the winter. It's because we don't have a definite subject there. Coolo. Directions. Rewrite the passive voice sentences as active voice sentences. Passive. The dog was hit by the car. How do we make that active?
the car hit the dog.
Car hit the dog. Next one. The house will be built by the construction crew in 5 months.
Construction crew will
Build the house.
in 5 months.
Gotcha. Julie answered the question. How to make that passive.
Question was answered by Julie.
Gotcha. Just flip it around. The dolphins have learned many tricks.
Many tricks are learned by dolphins.
Gotcha. Okay. Write one sentence using the active voice and one sentence using the passive voice. Let's skip that. That's it for that one. But there is a tricky one in there about the weather. So we'll have to, I'm sure we can look up the status of a subject, which is something like the weather. It's an interesting, vaguely interesting question. But what would we usually do when we don't know something? We write our way around it, right? Which is what we all do. But I guess the point being made in the chapter is the more we can learn and get more tools for writing with correct grammar, the less kind of sneaking around the issues we have to do in order to fix something. So it can give us more power over our writing, I guess. All right, well, that was marginally interesting. Pick concrete nouns and vigorous verbs. So let me just see. Oh, laptop just went to sleep. I can't see if anyone's chatting with us for a sec. I don't want to forget about folks on chat. There we go. And let's just try to refresh that. Amy has posted something to do with passive voice. Nico is with us. Cool. All right. Okay, bunch of people joining us. I'm just trying to see here. Shannon says the beach was visited by the family. That's sort of what we agreed on too. Okay. Let me try to stop this from going to sleep while we're doing this. Power and sleep settings, come on battery power. Okay. See how we do on this. All right. So, active voice, shorter, clearer, makes your sentences stronger, and definitely when delivered in an oral medium like radio, easier to understand. A long compound sentence in passive voice makes it harder for you to unravel and figure out, okay, who are we talking about? What are they doing? You know, it was a complex piece of legislation that was voted in 3 different movements by the Senate, and so you're waiting, oh, okay, finally it's the Senate who voted on the complex piece of legislation. So, you know, in active tense or active structure, it works better for broadcasting. Try to do that. Sentence length. Sentence length, I mean, your typical sentence is going to be 17 to 23 words. I bet you've never sat down and counted the number of words in your sentences, or maybe some of you have actually. Yes, okay. I, for one, definitely hadn't. So it's a good thing to get a sense of you know, what a medium sentence is, and then shorter or longer sentences can be used, especially a short sentence can be used to punctuate a few more medium length sentences. So I think one thing for when you write for broadcast and start reading it back to yourself, if all your sentences are the same length, then you're going to start to talk like this. Every time you talk, you'll have the same sort of rhythm, you know, and so it's going to quickly fall into a pattern which will be distracting actually as you fall into it. So the idea is to vary your sentence lengths. Your medium sentences are typically, you know, what you use most of the time, but it's great to punctuate with a short sentence sometimes, you know. Try as well to, again, when I write some super long convoluted sentence that I'm trying to unravel, I'll look at it and I'll say, what am I trying to say here? Am I trying to put 2 or 3 pieces of information into this sentence? And is that what's clogging it up and turning it into something nightmarishly complex? Can I break it down into 3 separate sentences with a more active structure? Does that then sound silly? Do I need to, you know, combine 2 of those sentences and keep the third one separate? This is the kind of thing that I'm thinking as I'm rewriting some sentences that I've sort of spontaneously written as I'm first getting the story out. So looking at your sentence lengths, sometimes if you've got a long kind of run-on sentence, which you know, there are times when you're going to want to use a long sentence, and certainly when you read written news articles in the Chronicle or wherever, you'll find longer sentences than 23 words, obviously. But in writing for broadcast, you're going to probably want to cut them down, break them up so that they're more one idea per sentence and more of an active sentence structure. Once you're doing that, then look it over. If it sounds like you know, that you're being redundant, maybe you can create some compound sentences. Like I said, once you've broken it up, try putting some pieces back together if it doesn't flow enough. Short sentences pack a punch, but only if they stand in contrast to most of your story written in medium sentences and stuff. So, you know, if you have some time, and you certainly will in doing the assignment that I'm going to give today, you're going to, you know, base yourself off of some print journalists' facts and their article. You know, just look through and see, like, what is a 17-word sentence like? What's a 23-word sentence like? In your own work, see if you can, you know, punctuate with a short sentence and otherwise. So be aware of the lengths of your sentences and of your sentence structures. Try, and again, if you know, the nice thing about news writing is it's usually about things that are happening in the world. You're not necessarily talking about, you know, some abstraction like justice, so much as you are talking about concrete things that happen in the court, for instance. And so, your nouns can be more concrete, the concrete nouns, and think about, especially in radio, you're using your words to create a kind of a mental image. That's part of the strength of radio, right? There's people are just listening to you. So for that reason, without being flowery or obtuse, but if you can use a verb which is more active in itself, more vigorous, as they say, go for that, and then try it, read it back to yourself, and say, "Woof, does that sound a little bit too much or something?" But try pushing the language a little bit to see what kind of imagery you can create. Okay, let's. This is all being hopefully useful to you. Let's take a look at the assignment. And so we don't need this. We don't need this. We're here. Okay, let me first show you what I'm pulling on, so you'll be able to find this yourself when you go in there. So when we go into modules, and we're looking at week 3, and we've been talking about grammar. In the next class, there'll be some more stuff on that. But so here we go. Here's the assignment: radio, reader, and rap, which is what we're going to write. And then here's a little tutorial that I wrote up, and it's in PDF. So when you click on it, you should be able to download it and open it up on your computer. And so I've already done that here, I thought. Maybe I haven't. Let's do that again. There it is. Okay. So there's the assignment, and then there's this little handout talking about the different types of radio news stories. So there are 3 types of stories that you'll hear on the radio news. You'll hear what's called a reader. Another type of story is called a rap, and sometimes they'll call it a wrap around. And then you've got a feature. So in this assignment, we're going to write a reader and a rap based on facts that you're going to find in a newspaper article, which is not the way that people usually go about doing this. It's just an exercise. Next week, your assignment for next week, which we'll do the week after, is to come up with a couple of story ideas of your own. And a couple weeks after that, you'll be writing a feature script based on your own interviews and work. But for now, for next Tuesday, we're going to be writing a reader and a rap. So, what is a reader? A reader is a script of a news story in which no actualities are to be played. The script is read live on the air by the newscaster. Actuality is a fancy word in radio writing for a soundbite. So a reader, let's say, I'm going to ask you to write, let's say, a 30-second story that is read by the anchor on the radio. So it's the announcer who introduces the show and everything. They will just read the 30-second news item. All right. The rap is like a reader, except in the middle of it, there is a soundbite. And a soundbite in radio is called an actuality, a recorded segment of a newsmaker speaking, generally lasting from 10 to 20 seconds. That's an actuality. Non-news writers call this a soundbite. Okay. And when you're writing it into a script, there are some things that you have to put in order to identify what that is for the people who are producing this. So a rap starts out with the reporter saying, temperatures in San Francisco reached a record high this weekend, and people flocked to the swimming pools in order to beat the heat. And then you've got a little kid saying, I had a great time at the pool. It was so cool. And then you go back to the reporter and they say, 4 people died over the weekend and blah, blah, blah. So, all right. So the rap is you have a soundbite that was recorded by the reporter, and the rap part of it is the reporter talking. So a rap would be like reporter, soundbite, and then reporter again.
So soundbite is like someone who's being interviewed.
Exactly. Yeah, like the little kid talking about being at the pool, and the reporter is the one telling you the story. So they call it a rap because the reporter's writing is wrapped around a soundbite. Okay, so before we go on, let's listen to some examples. Some from today and some from last semester, or maybe even it's like more than a year now. Let me just, and in fact, let's just hear. So what we're trying to hear here is, are we listening to a reader? Are we listening to a rap?
Station, KGO, San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, a Cumulus station. It's 9 o'clock.
From ABC News. I'm Daria Albinger. President Obama says there should be no questions where the U.S. stands when it comes to ISIS.
Once again, it must be clear to anyone who would plot against America and try to do Americans harm that we will not tolerate safe havens for terrorists who threaten our people.
He made brief remarks from the White House South Lawn the morning after the first airstrikes on the terror group's targets in Syria. And he says the U.S. isn't going it alone. ABC Stephen Portnoy at the White House.
The president says the U.S. is proud to stand shoulder to shoulder.
Okay, so what did we just hear there? We heard President Obama rapped by the anchor, okay? So that could be a rap. And then we move even seamlessly, because we're still on the same topic, we move into a reporter who continues the story here.
Shoulder with Arab nations in the fight against ISIS.
We also took strikes to disrupt plotting against the United States and our allies by seasoned al-Qaeda operatives in Syria who are known as the Khorasan Group.
It's the first time the president has ever mentioned the name Khorasan in public. The group is believed to be working on new ways to avoid explosive detection, a threat to the homeland that some officials argue is more urgent than ISIS. Stephen Portnoy, ABC News, the White House.
So that was kind of a rap grafted onto another rap, right? And that's both of those were sound bites of the president, probably just taken from the wire. So they, all of these stations subscribe to a wire service, which makes available not only facts and pre-written stories, but also sound bites. So probably a reporter was picking up those sound bites, and they were basically made available to any. So for your national news, you're occasionally picking those sound bites, those actualities, off of a computer server rather than going out and making them yourselves. However, that's basically still a rap.
Who is Khorasan? ABC's Louis Martinez at the Pentagon.
This is a group of experienced fighters from Afghanistan, experienced al-Qaeda leadership who were sent purposely by al-Qaeda's leadership to Syria, that under the cover of the chaos of the Syrian civil war, to take advantage of it and to plan attacks against the United States.
The president will try to rally more coalition partners on his visit to the UN today. 3 people are dead after a
Okay, let's just back up on the 3 people there. Well, let's just go forward.
Shooting at a UPS facility in Inglenook, Alabama. All were employees, the shooter among the dead. The CDC says
that was it. That was a reader. So 3 people are dead after a shooting in the UPS. Notice there was no soundbite there, right? It was just from beginning to end. It happens so fast you hardly even hear it coming, right? But that's the way a lot of them are in this type of news. So we're working on these very short news items here.
So 30 seconds is actually pretty long.
Pardon me?
The board says 30 seconds. That's pretty long.
Yes, for some of these, yeah. It gives you more chance to, these will be like a 30 seconds, about 6 to 10 lines of in your script. Nika?
Do we write it, or do you want us to record it?
You don't record it, yeah. Unfortunately, we're just a writing class, so we just do that. Here's some from today, I think, if I can get them in.
Taking weather together on the 8s on All News 106.9 and AM 740 KCBS. It's 9:22.
Inmates charged with nonviolent crimes in Santa Clara County could soon be able to get out of jail without posting bail.
KCBS's Mike Colgan has more on this get-out-of-jail-free card.
One idea is to do away with monetary bail for those arrested for nonviolent crimes.
You won't need money bail. You'll need to follow another set of procedures or programs in order to be allowed to leave jail without posting bail.
Santa Clara County Supervisor Cindy Chavez says the present bail system is unfair.
For the same crime, someone else could post bail, or same alleged crime, one person can post bail and they get out because they have money. Another person can't afford the bail, so they stay in the jails. And the thing to remember is that we want our criminal justice system to be fair, effective, and cost-effective.
Chavez says it costs the county and taxpayers up to $190 a night to house an inmate. The Silicon Valley Bureau, Mike Colgan, KCBS.
Okay, so that is a very typical structure for a rap, right? Because we heard sound bites there, so we know that we're in a rap. So if I was gonna, I can't really erase anything, but let's say, okay, what I'm trying to do is just right here. What did we hear there for the rap? We heard the anchor introduce the reporter, and the anchor gives a little bit of information there too. Then the reporter comes on, starts the story, and then there was an actuality. Reporter came back and actually attributed. In other words, we heard that actuality without knowing who was talking. So there's a short actuality there, and then back to the reporter who said Cindy Chavez of so-and-so was talking about this, and we go back to her again for the actuality, a second one, and then we go to the reporter, and the reporter at the end identifies himself or herself. You know, this is Malcolm Cecil for KCSF. That's called a lockout. Okay, so that is very typically what a rap is like. So the wrapped things are the actualities, and otherwise we start with the anchor who's tying together these stories. Did someone start to say something? Yeah, JP?
Do our raps have to be longer than the reader's script?
It probably will be, because you have to incorporate at least one actuality.
Like in terms of time or something?
Yeah, in terms of time, I'm asking for 45 seconds on the rap to give you, let's say, about the same amount of reporter talk as you would have in a reader, but plus a 15-second soundbite or so. And I'm not asking you to write down to the exact second, although sometimes these things are looked at that way. But yeah, so the rap will be longer than the reader because you're incorporating actualities. Yeah, Jenny? A lockout is, this is Jenny Shao for KCSF News. That's the lockout. So at the end, you say who you were when you were reporting. Now a reader, remember, the reader is read by the anchor. So the anchor, if they even state their name, it would be at the beginning of the show. You know, this is whoever, Julie Hayner at KTVU or whatever. But the anchor will not say at the end of every reader who they are. So there's no lockout for a reader, right? You'll say, you know, at the UPS facility in Alabama, 3 people were killed, and that's the end of it. Then you go on to the next one. And at City College in San Francisco, you know, there's record numbers of attendance or something. So you don't actually identify, you know, at the end of every reader, you don't say who you are, right? Because it's just one story after another, read by the anchor. Kyle?
So the lockout is the anchor, right?
No, the lockout is like a reporter. So in this case...
Can you just play the video through again with that list on the board?
For sure.
This is 106.9 and AM 740 KCBS. It's 9:22.
Inmates charged with nonviolent crimes in Santa Clara County could soon be able to get out of jail without posting bail. KCBS's Mike Colgan has more on this get-out-of-jail-free card.
One idea is to do away with monetary bail for those arrested for nonviolent crimes.
You won't need money bail. You'll need to follow another set of procedures or programs in order to be allowed to leave jail without posting bail.
Santa Clara County Supervisor Cindy Chavez says the present bail system is unfair.
For the same crime, someone else could post bail, or same alleged crime, one person can post bail and they get out because they have money. Another person can't afford the bail, so they stay in the jails. And the thing to remember is that we want our criminal justice system to be fair, effective, and cost-effective.
Chavez says it costs the county and taxpayers up to $190 a night to house an inmate. The Silicon Valley Bureau, Mike Colgan, KCBS.
It was a little bit scary. A Japan Airlines plane lifting off from New York, making an emergency landing right.
Yep. So when we break it down, it may be hard to follow just the voices or stuff because the audio quality sucks anyway. But you know that gives you, that's so typical for a rap. Shannon?
And that the actualities worked because the first one was shorter than the second one before we knew who the speaker was, right?
Yes, great point. So on the finer art of writing into an actuality, if you want, because here's the thing. You as the reporter, you know what the story is. You've gone out to that press conference and you've recorded Cindy Chavez, no matter how busy it was, and there's all that hubbub there. And you get back and you pull from the tape that you've recorded the 2 sound bites that you've got there. And that may have been actually just one chunk of 45 seconds of Cindy Chavez that you found, okay, here's a good actuality where she actually says something in a nice compact form. And then you write around it, you know. And just one of the rules is really, if you only have one actuality, you should be saying who we're going to hear before they talk. So if in this case there were 2 actualities, there was a short one, so you could play Cindy Chavez starting to talk a bit, and then you interrupt her, and that's where you say Cindy Chavez, you know, whatever she is. So you give an attribution, you say who she is, and then you let her continue talking. So that is one way of, you got to let the audience know who they're hearing. Who is this person? So either you tell us up front so we know before we hear, or you interrupt a little bit and give the majority of the actuality after you've identified them. Does that make sense? So that's another thing. Jenny?
2 things. So the attribution in this case is the reporter introducing or identifying who the actuality is.
That's right.
You know, this is the mom, blah, 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 and it goes into the actuality.
That's correct, yeah. So that's where you'd want to make sure you know her official title and how to pronounce her name right and stuff, because this is where you tell the audience who's going to talk.
And then as far as the soundbite is concerned, is that strictly an interview or soundbites like, I've heard news radio broadcasts before, soundbites can be, say, a BART train going by.
Okay, that's something we call NAT Sound, natural sound. So if it's not a person who's talking, communicating information, but rather sounds and stuff, we call that NAT Sound.
And that would also be considered.
That would be written into the script. Well, typically you don't treat it in quite the same way. If NAT Sound is used in one of these, it's rarely used in these readers and raps, but it would be in a feature, and usually it plays sort of at the beginning of stuff in order to set the scene, you know, with some sound effects and stuff like that. Shannon?
There was a really good episode of Radio Lab about Surya Bonali, the figure skater, and they used the NAT sound of a figure skater cutting into the ice and making the sharp sounds that it made, and it played while they were talking over as NAT sound. So they were saying, you know, at the 1992 Olympics, Surya Bonali was disqualified for doing a backflip or whatever. That wasn't true, but you could hear the sound of the skating while it was playing, and it, like, I'm getting chills right now talking about it.
Right,
it's so real.
Right.
And it really, like, brought the whole story together. And I think without that NAT sound, as sparsely as it was used, it wouldn't have been the same story.
Got you. And plus it was not so intrusive that they would distract from it. Yeah, so that sounds really cool. Radio Lab is beautifully edited.
That was my question, like, with NAT sound, is that considered a soundbite or soundbite strictly, as we've been hearing, the interviews that the reporters are conducting?
That's correct. And do remember that officially it's not called a soundbite, it's called an actuality. And we'll continue to use that so it'll become more obvious. So regular people call it a soundbite, right? But others call it, you know, in the business, it's called an actuality. And when you write it into the script, it's written ACT, act, as short for actuality. And now Jenny and Shannon are talking about the sounds of the place where you recorded. So that's called a NAT or a NAT sound. So that is typically abbreviated NAT SND in square brackets. So when they appear in square brackets in the script, people know not to read it. They know that it's just an identifier there. So they also call it raw sound, but NAT sound is recorded sound that is not of a newsmaker speaking, such as it's the sound of an airplane landing or a marching band playing or a crowd cheering. Okay, so they call it NAT sound. And in a longer piece, like a feature like you guys are going to write, it definitely has its place. In these short news cuts, as you hear, it's just so fast. There's not a lot of time for sound effects and stuff like that. Does that make sense? Okay, so the rap is obviously more complex than the reader, which is just somebody reading for 30 seconds. It's you don't have that whole structure there. So let me just, darn.
And the thing that we need to write, are we going to need to put in the brackets with things like act?
Yes, yes. Let me continue on and show you. I have a couple of examples here. So this page was just terminology. So we can come back to some of this other stuff, but the lockout, we talked about what that is. That's the final words of a report spoken by a journalist. And so this is Malcolm Cecil, KCSF, San Francisco. We talked about reader, rap, feature, we're going to get to later. The lead, so the lead is, and sometimes spelled L-E-D-E as well. It's, important concept for all forms of journalism. It's the first sentence or the first couple of sentences of a news story. And those typically have to kind of announce what this is about and grab your interest. And so a good news story in any form will have a lead which kind of grabs people's attention and lets them know what they're going to hear. And so that's important. Let me show you a couple of examples of what this looks like on the page. Okay. Well, here, in these couple of pages, it describes how you write this thing down, and we can come back to it. But here's an example of a reader by Carol Summers, who was a student last year. So it's written in all caps, 12-point, 1-inch margins.
Does it have to be in that?
The reason for that, this is,
for like our assignment.
You don't like Courier?
I was just asking.
I say that you should, so go ahead and do it that way. But honestly, each news organization has their own format. Some of them will be doing this in a different way, but this is the way that we're going to do it. So reader, it's going to be all caps, 12-point, 1-inch margins. The reason that they standardize on this is some people feel that it gives a reliable timing to know how many lines of text there are here. So once you get used to it, this is a fast 30 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines. So, we could read it through and we'd come out with 30 seconds, lickety-split, read pretty fast. The structure of this thing, so from here up, nothing official. But from here down, this is all what we're trying to do. It has something called the slug. Okay, the first 3 lines, there's a title, there's the name of the journalist, and what's called total runtime, which abbreviates a TRT. So the assignment is 30 seconds, and Carol did her best to write tight 30 seconds here. Maybe it's, you'd have to read it fast to get it into 30, but that's okay. There's so much going on here, even in a 10-line news story. I think you can learn a lot just from this, So format all caps, get the slug in there with 1, 2, 3. And now, basically reading over her piece, it says, according to the San Francisco Examiner, the Planning Commission on Thursday unanimously approved the construction of a 7-story, 62-unit residential building on the site of the former restaurant Home at 2100 Market Street. Okay, how many words is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. What did we get there? 34? 34 or so. So notice I was running out of breath. So, obviously you stop and you breathe a little bit for this, but that's getting onto a long sentence.
I also want to point out that when you use this format and you get used to it, if you've been using it for a while, I looked at that and I said, that's 34 words. And then when we counted, it was 34.
You got it, yeah.
You get so used to the format and knowing how it relates to time.
Got you. I've read it's at this format. It's typically 12 words. Is that how you guessed it? 12 words per line, about? Yeah. So something around there. So that's probably a little bit long. However, notice she says, according to the San Francisco Examiner. So it's very important. We're taking the information from other news sources. We really have to attribute. We really have to say where it's from, to give them credit, to avoid accusations of plagiarism, and to establish for the audience where this information is coming from. So the easiest thing really is like according to the San Francisco Examiner, or the San Francisco Examiner reports, or the San Francisco Examiner reported today that. Okay, so because we're taking the information from the Chronicle or the Examiner or wherever you find it, you want to attribute again. So you want to say that. So this is pretty good. I'd say my only comment to her on this one was this comes off as a headline, and there are no headlines in broadcast writing, right? I mean, well, there is if it goes onto the website, but in terms of having somebody read, the Planning Commission unanimously approves construction of a 62-unit residential building in the Upper Market area. This clearly is redundant in the sense that we have a 62-unit residential building here. So my guess was that she intended this to be a sort of a headline, but it shouldn't be there. So really the story starts from there, which is where I started reading it.
What would you say instead of this, like on the first sentence, a 62-unit residential building?
Why wouldn't you, is there some reason you wouldn't want to say that? Or?
Like to avoid like the redundancies?
Oh, I don't think this should even be there. I think that should be just removed. Because look, she says the Planning Commission, right? So you got your subject, approved, unanimously approved. You got your verb, you got your object. So basically everything set up here, maybe 2100 Market Street is more precise than Upper Market area, but you know what I mean?
Lower Market.
Is it?
Yeah.
Whoops, got me.
Like soon.
That's why it helps to be from where you actually are reporting on. But I would cut that out and basically go with this.
Like I'm thinking like soon there will be in the coming like, I don't know how many years or so this will take to complete, but like in the coming years residents of the Upper Market area will see new homes.
Ah, as a kind of a lead in. Yeah, you could, that would be what we'd call a soft lead. Yeah. This one is a hard lead, right? It comes in, it just tells you this long sentence, too long perhaps, tells you everything you need to know. And you could use a soft lead, which would be more like, residents of the Lower Market area are soon going to have more places to live. Yeah, that would be a nice soft lead. You could do that. Shannon?
Could have played on home too and moved home higher in that attribution paragraph and open with, you used to eat at home and now you can live there. There's buildings coming to where the home restaurant used to be, and that's a more attractive lead than a planning commission approving something, because no one really wants to hear about that.
Gotcha. So yes, so these are both creative ideas for leads that are more out of the ordinary. So what they call a hard lead is just giving the facts. A soft lead, and there's, in coming weeks we'll deal a little bit more with, leads and such. Soft leads are more to intrigue people. Remember, because there's two parts to the lead. Tell them what kind of story they're going to listen to, and also grab their attention. So a little bit of wordplay can sometimes wake people up and get them more interested, I'd say. So that is an example of the reader, all right? So again, to review what the format of a reader is, so it's a script, no actualities. The script is read live on the air by the anchor, so that's the format. If you have any complicated names, street names, personal names, anything, write it out phonetically in brackets, parentheses, and so that people have a chance to rehearse it before they go on air, and they could say that. And you give them an idea of how to say it that way. The slug, remember, there's got to be at the top left corner the title of the story. Keep it simple. It's just a reference for the production crew. Nobody in the audience ever hears the title of the story, but so that could have been Market New Building or something. The name of the reporter, so Carol Summers, but in this case it would be you guys, okay? Your name, and then the TRT, total runtime, 30 seconds. If it goes beyond, that's okay. Try to time it out and see. Yeah.
And that's not red.
Pardon me? This is not red. That's correct. So the top three are just to identify the story, and they call that the slug. So there's her slug. Okay, and notice there is no lockout here. She doesn't say this is Carol Summers for KCSF, because this is a reader. So she's writing this so that the anchor can read it, so she doesn't lock out. Okay? So now let's look at a wrap. The wrap is a little bit more complicated. So in our class, again, the format differs depending on what news organization is working. But in our class, we write the actuality in sentence case, and the rest of it we write as we did in a reader. So all caps. So once again, we got the same thing here. We got the slug, title, reporter, total runtime. We come in with the anchor. 3 people were killed Saturday night when a car burst into flames after colliding with a taxi cab. KCSF's Carol Summers has the story. So remember, when the anchor comes on and the anchor is going to toss it over to the reporter, you name the reporter. In this case, it would be you. And it's something like KCSF's Carol Summers has more, has the story, was there, or however you want to toss it over, just make it efficient. And then to indicate that we're going to somebody else, you put their name in square brackets. So then she says, it happened south of Market in the area of 9th and Brannan Streets around 9:20 p.m. CHP Officer Williams saw a Chevy sedan doing donuts at 5th and Bryant Streets and started pursuit. Now we're going to hear the actuality of Officer Williams. So she writes ACT, which is short for actuality, and then the name of the officer in that case. This is not strictly necessary unless if you have two people, 2 sources of actualities, you need to write the name. Otherwise, you can just write act as well. So Officer Williams says, instead of stopping, the car started to blow through red lights on city streets. We give the total runtime of that actuality. Okay, it's timed out at 4 seconds. So remember we talked about attribution? Well, in this case, Carol says, CHP Officer Williams saw a Chevy sedan doing donuts, setting up who's talking, okay? So then we come back to Carol. That's when Williams ended pursuit. The Chevy continued to flee. 2 blocks away at 9th and Brannan, Williams saw it collide with a taxi cab. By the time he reached the vehicles, the Chevy was engulfed in flames. 2 people were found dead inside the Chevy, and a 3rd person was found dead outside the vehicle. The police are still investigating. This is Carol Summers for KCSF, so there's the lockout, okay? So when you look at it, sentences are pretty short, pretty simple sentences, but it tells the story. And engulfed in flames, for instance, gives us a certain kind of visual component there. All right, so in this case, it would be anchor, reporter, actuality, reporter, lockout, and you're finished. So a little more simple than this. But that's the way to do the wrap. Okay, so that's how that's done. And if I just go back into my little write-up about this, it's, so the wrap, there's a definition of it. We use the same formatting, basically. The elements of the wrap. So the anchor's introduction, the thing to watch out for the anchor's introduction is to make sure that you don't steal the lead from the reporter. So typically the reporter writes their whole story, and they will also suggest or write an anchor's lead-in that then goes into the master script for the whole news program. And that's in order to stop the anchor from stealing the lead from the reporter. So, the reporter wants to have the best start to the story. So the anchor's lead-in to the reporter is usually sort of more vague, more general. The reporter then comes in with the actual lead.
Can you provide an example?
not off the top of my head. But let's.
A fire in the building.
A fire in a building, so it might be something as simple as more news on last night's fire in the Mission. Jenny Shao has the story. And then you could come in and say, police worked all night looking for signs of arson, and this morning they may have found some, a gas can or something that indicates. So you're coming in with the hard facts. And the anchor is more, that was a really boring example, but off the top of my head, they're just setting you up, so that you keep the real news. Okay, in terms of actualities, I just...
It wasn't bad for on the spot.
Pardon me?
It wasn't bad.
It wasn't bad for on the spot? Okay. To the folks who are following us on chat, I'm really sorry. My computer completely has gone to sleep here. And I just want to see if you guys are talking to us or something. However, so in terms of actualities, try to keep them short, 15 to 20 seconds. We had some rather long actualities in one of the examples that I played. And you can feel it kind of drag out when it gets to about 30 seconds for sure. There's some ludicrously short ones in other examples that I have as well. So try to keep the active voice, vigorous verbs, concrete nouns. Try to stay conversational. So as you read it over, does it sound sort of like you would just tell the story to someone? I think Carol was pretty successful doing that. She kept her sentences simple, and she was just, she took a very chronological structure. The car then drove off and smashed into this or that. And so it's attention-grabbing lead if you can, clear transition into and out of actualities. So again, as I said, it's a bit of an art. Once you get all of this kind of under control, one of the things you're trying to do is to set up the actuality as best you can. So the worst way of setting up an actuality would be something like, where is it here? We talked to Officer Williams and he told us. That would be a bad setup, okay? Because you're kind of wasting your time. Look at what Carol did here. CHP Officer Williams saw a Chevy sedan doing donuts at 5th and Bryan Streets and started pursuit.
Putting it into context?
She gave exactly. She gave context. So it's almost like when she played back the tape that she had of Officer Williams, he said, well, I was out there and then I saw this car doing donuts, so I decided to follow. And then, so she's paraphrased that information, and then she takes her actuality that she, actually wanted. So again, a boring setup for an actuality would just be CHP Officer Williams told us it was bad, or something like that, right? If you can give some context, you can use your setup in order to give some information. So that's the nicest way of setting something up. You've got to say their name. But after that, you can do something useful with it as well as, because, when she says, and started pursuit, she's already kicked the ball off. It's rolling in a narrative about what happened, which is nice. So if you can do that, that's even better, to use your actuality well like that, to set them up. So that's something that, there are whole books with tried and true recipes for this, that if you ever get into it, but it's the best thing is to work them out for yourself first. Yeah, Corey?
Clarify, the reader is only read by the anchor and the rap is only read by the reporter, correct?
There are cases where the anchor could work as the reporter as well. But then there wouldn't be this business of setting up the reporter, and then the anchor would just play a soundbite.
Most of the time it's with the rap, the reader, and then...
Exactly, yeah. You'll see that once you listen to news, now you know all this, you'll see variations, you'll see them kind of chaining one thing onto another, which we just did in KGO, and it all goes by in like the space of 3-4 minutes. It's crazy fast. So my advice, read your draft out loud to find errors and rough spots to fix, right? You're writing a script for somebody to read. So if you just read it out loud, and you could record yourself if you want on your phone, or just listen to yourself. If you're stumbling over words, problem, fix it. If you're running out of breath, one of your sentences is probably too long. If there's a name in there you stumble over, look it up and write it, phonetically for people. So everything can be discovered and fixed by reading it out loud, But then the other thing is, if you're writing in all caps, your spell check won't work. So another thing to do in order to take advantage of the spell check is just switch it back to sentence case and spell check it. And then the other thing is just remember that if you write TOO instead of TO, the spell check is not going to identify that as a problem. It'll say, oh, you spelled it right. You just didn't use it right. So, be careful of those words which are correctly spelled, but they turn out not to be the right word. Yeah. Shannon?
In most processors, you can write just regular with caps and stuff, and then there's a drop-down option to change the format under the format thing to all caps.
Gotcha.
You can write and read and get your corrections as you write, and then just do it afterward.
Yes. Yeah. So you could just write it normally and then worry about the formatting afterwards. Who uses, let's see, Word? Myself? Not too many. Google Docs? Google, okay. All right, they all work. Who uses, what else do you use?
Scrivener?
Scrivener. Don't know about Pages? Okay, that'll be fun.
Scrivener is, I forgot the really expensive script writing software for like video. It's a cheap version of that.
Okay. Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
Front Page or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Final Draft.
Final Draft, yeah, it's a cheap version of Final Draft.
Okay. Kaylee, what do you use?
OpenOffice.
OpenOffice, okay. Yeah. All right. Well, all of them will have a spell check, and eventually you can output all of them as a PDF. Okay.
Probably try and pay attention for stuff like improper uses of words too.
I don't know. But let me bring you back because I only have a couple more minutes to, yes.
Like vigorous verbs.
Vigorous verbs is, I'm trying to say that if you have I'm trying to say reach for verbs that are more visual in their content. So instead of, I'm just bad at coming up with examples off the top of my head.
Instead of walked, he staggered drunkenly.
Yeah, avoid the adjectives, but instead of walked, staggered, or, that kind of thing. Yeah. But you can go way too far, way too quickly with those too. So but try them out. That's my point. Okay, so to the assignment now. So you have a week to do this. The thing that you have to do is find a couple of news stories in a newspaper like the Chronicle or the Examiner or wherever, and basically take the facts out and write a reader and a wrap. So if the assignment's there, but if we just, for instance, go to, oh my God. Just trying to, boom. Ton of things. I'd say, so to write a reader, what you're looking for is a story that's relatively brief with facts that you can use. And if you're going to Google News, you're probably going to find anything you need right in here. You're basically just looking for stuff. But when you want to write a wrap, you need a quote, right? You need a quote that you can turn into, this is pretty awesome. You need a quote that you can turn into a soundbite. So, what you're looking for is something like that, so this would become your actuality, right? So when you're writing the rap, you don't make up an actuality. You need to have a story in which somebody is quoted. Like in this case, it's Putin. So this may not be the one you want to tackle, but nonetheless, there's a quote in here. And so that's what you pull out and work with that as your actuality. So in a reader, you're just reporting the facts and finding a good way to do it. In the actuality, you're reporting the facts, but you're also pulling out in a rap, you're pulling out an actuality. Okay? All right, it's 2:45. This is due next Tuesday. So on Thursday, we'll have a chance just to revisit, and you can ask any questions if you want to. Okay? And maybe you could just check and make sure that that PDF is there for you. Look it over. Maybe some questions that come out of that. But this is a good a real good exercise for writing a couple of short use items.